you have a very big background on human rights and harm reduction. Why harm reduction is so important when we come to regulation of new product of nicotine?
We can't eliminate harm in our society, on our planet, but we try and reduce that harm. So whether that's wearing seatbelts in cars, or tobacco harm reduction, or needle exchanges, these are things that try and minimise that harm and understand and acknowledge that we cannot eliminate harm.
Why do you think some legislators and regulators are against vaping?
I think it's that old, Nancy Reagan position of just say no, that abstinence is the answer. No sex before marriage, don't smoke, don't do drugs. It's not the reality. It's wishful thinking that this could be the way society works. So once you recognise that is an impossible objective, then they need to move away from this. But for many politicians, they have been able to just say no. They had good families. They've had, good paid jobs. They've not suffered trauma or disadvantage. So maybe they don't understand some of the consequences and the impacts that other people's lives have experienced.
What role do you think are playing the non-profit anti-tobacco entities in this discussion?
They're playing an enormous role, and it's almost like big tobacco is so big it can never be forgiven. It has killed so many people. We can never ever put aside that for harm reduction or for a more modest approach, and to see that big tobacco is following the needs of its consumers. Consumers don't want to die of cancer. They're finding that they like nicotine, and so they're looking for safer ways to do that, to get their nicotine. So I think it's very difficult for legislators to look at tobacco as anything but evil.
What you have found after so many years on this topic about what science says, the science that talk against vaping and the science that is showing that vaping is good. What's your thought?
To me, the science is in. We know categorically that vaping is less harmful than smoking. And I think we should always talk about vaping, not e-cigarettes, because somehow people then think that they're one and the same with smoking. Smoking is not vaping, and vaping is not smoking. And it's so important that we understand that our governments understand that it is not the same, and that the science is categoric that it is less harmful. I'm not saying it's harmless. All I'm saying is it's far less harmful.
And what can you tell us about the science that goes against of vaping? What have you found there?
I have not found any of it that has stood up to scrutiny. We had EVALI, we've had these links to teen smoking, yet the evidence and the data does not correlate with those hypotheses, and most of those areas are just hypothesis, and it's we don't have the evidence yet. We have enough evidence to know that smoking kills people, and that vaping is less harmful.
You talk about the valley. In this moment, in many countries of Latin America, in Chile, and Peru, Mexico, and everywhere, we are in the fight. And all the governments and the anti-tobaccos are using a valley as a powerful tool to go against vaping. What can you tell you about a valley?
It has been very successful. It was a very successful conspiracy campaign. And I'm afraid not only in South America, but even in Australia, we are still combating the misinformation that campaign has sent and permeated through many of our government systems and our health departments. We just have to keep proving and showing the evidence, showing that, you know, the CDC actually redacted what they had said, that it just wasn't true.
That's good to state clearly for the other politicians of the world that have studied. It's not true.
Yeah.
There is no doubt about it. I just want to put it clear. Is there anything true on that?
It just wasn't true. Now, certainly, if you mix vitamin E with THC, then you may have a problem if you're vaping that. But that was what was found to be the cause of those very tragic deaths. It had nothing to do with vaping. It had nothing to do with nicotine. It had nothing to do with e-cigarettes.
There are some important people with a lot of money that are putting their money against tobacco. We hear during this conference talking about Bloomberg. What role is Bloomberg having in this discussion?
Well, I think he's having a very powerful role, and I think he is so politically connected, particularly in the USA, but I think also globally because of his wealth, that he has a huge influence on our governments, not just in the US, but globally. And it's very problematic because what he's arguing is not based on the science. It's ignoring the evidence, and it is actually killing people.
How much do you think it came directly from Bloomberg, and it's not about the people that work in ONGs that are profiting and making a life from the money of Bloomberg?
It's a great question, because I was thinking about that as I was listening to the last speech, thinking about that kind of parasitic relation that many of those agencies that Bloomberg pays millions of dollars to. So they must please Bloomberg. And so if Bloomberg wants to hear what he wants to hear, then these agencies will ensure that happens. Now, sadly, I think the World Health Organization is also caught up in that parasitic relationship with Bloomberg. They rely on his money.
If you will willing to send a message for the politicians and legislators in Chile that we are right now in this topic at the rest of Latin America talking about this, what will be your message for them?
My message is that we know that smoking kills millions of our citizens and it debilitates millions of our citizens. So we must look at less harmful options. And okay, abstinence is best, but vaping is far less harmful and it will save lives, and at the bottom line, it will save governments money. We will have less people in our hospitals. We will have less people on our pension systems. So it makes complete sense, the same as seatbelts make sense in cars. Vaping makes sense as part of our tobacco policies.
The last question, what is your position after all this time being involved? What is your position toward vaping? And if you think so, why vaping should be a tool for the government in the public health politics?
What I see when you look at the data, countries like Australia that tax very highly on their tobacco, that restrict tobacco use extraordinarily, we have plateaued, and particularly amongst our disadvantaged, our smoking rates are still very high. So what we're doing isn't working. So let's look at the evidence and use vaping as another tool. It's not the only tool, but it should be one of the tools that we use to finally reduce our smoking, and hopefully with that goal of being a smoke-free world.
The last thing to close, It's vaping, smoking.
I'm no scientist, but I know that vaping is not smoking.
Thanks a lot for your time. It was awesome.